Bad news, I died. Good news, I got transmigrated into a book. Bad news, I landed in the belly of a peasant woman and was about to be born as a fake heiress. Good news, I'd read this book cover to cover. I knew that when the real heiress came home, she'd use her parents' guilt against me. She'd even schemed to get me caught in bed with my own brother, so furious would our parents be that they'd throw me out of the house, and I'd die a miserable death in some back alley on a rainy night. So the year I turned 5, I took every coin I'd ever been given and paid a street urchin to show up at the manor gates claiming to be the real heiress. When I turned 8, a second urchin took her place. At 10, a third. By the time I turned 15, the household already had 8 real heiresses crammed into it. People back then didn't know about alum and water to distinguish family lines, so as far as anyone could tell, all 8 girls shared blood with both the Marquis and his wife. As for why one daughter had become 8, the sage just smiled and said it wasn't meant to be spoken of. The year I turned 16, the real heiress finally came home. I'm looking for the Marquis, or Lady Griffith. Please let them know, I'm their birth daughter. I was switched as a baby at the hospital 16 years ago. The day Ivy Griffith, the real heiress, came to find her family, the rain fell harder than usual. She stood square in the doorway, drenched. Her thin, coarse dress clung to a frame gone gaunt with hunger, every angle of her showing through the fabric. Rainwater ran in dark ropes from her matted hair, and her face had gone blue-white with cold. Only her eyes stayed startlingly bright. Tucker, the gatekeeper, summed her up in his own words. This girl's missing a screw somewhere, running to a stranger's house in rain like this. And I sure can't bring her in soaked to the bone like this to see the Marquis and the Marchioness. What if she catches a chill and gets everybody else sick too? Tucker eyed the girl standing there dripping onto the front steps, clearly torn. Ever since the manor had picked up several new heiresses, someone showed up almost every month claiming to be a long-lost Griffith heiress. Most were frauds. But you could never be sure one of them wasn't the real thing. By the time the news reached the inner house, I was sitting with my mother, keeping her company. The moment she heard another girl had come to claim kinship, Lady Griffith shuddered. Lord above, when does this end? I don't have any fingers left to prick for her. She held up both hands miserably, 10 fingers wrapped in gauze, her face somewhere between exhausted and despairing. I haven't picked up a needle to sew in so long my fingers ache just looking at one. She thrust her bandaged hands toward me, pouting like a scolded child. I'll need to drink 10 cups of your tea before I'll feel better. I laughed despite myself and cradled her hands gently, blowing on them. All right, all right. I'll make you a batch this afternoon. With extra sugar. You'd think she could have picked a better time to show up than while your father's away. Now I'm the one who has to get pricked again. My mother sighed, but she dutifully unwound the bandage from one finger anyway. Marigold, her personal maid, brought over a small gold bowl and carefully drew a single drop of blood. I swear, I hope this one really is my 9th daughter, so I never have to prick myself again. Heaven willing, Mama, this will be your 9th daughter for real. Everyone at Griffith Manor already knew there were supposed to be 9 daughters coming home. With me, that made 10, my mother liked to say I completed the set, her perfect 10. When the first real heiress came home, her blood matched both parents, and the 3 of them had wept in each other's arms with joy. When the second one's blood matched my nominal father's too, my mother had actually gone for a sword, only to discover, to everyone's shock, that the girl's blood matched hers as well. None of them understood how, but the 3 of them ended up in another tearful embrace regardless. By the time the third real heiress was welcomed home, my parents had finally realized something was deeply wrong, and sent for the sage. The sage said 9 was the number of extremes, and by some quirk of fate, the Marquis and Marchioness's real heiress had split into 9. As for why 9? The sage stroked his beard. Not meant to be spoken of, he said. More real daughters kept turning up, and plenty of imposters tried to pass themselves off as one of them too. That only made me, the fake daughter who'd grown up under my parents' roof since infancy, all the more precious by comparison. Add in the fact that I had a honeyed tongue and knew exactly what to say, and it made perfect sense that I'd end up their favorite. While all this was happening, Marigold came back carrying the bowl. Sure enough, Ivy and my mother hadn't even laid eyes on each other yet. Blood testing had become practically an assembly line at Griffith Manor by this point. My mother watched the 2 drops of blood swirl together in the bowl and dissolve into one, and tears of relief spilled down her cheeks. Quick! Get a courtyard ready for our 9th daughter. And pass the word, anyone else who comes claiming kinship gets thrown straight out. Once Ivy had been cleaned up and dressed properly, they brought her out to the courtyard. Why the courtyard and not one of the private sitting rooms? Simple, there were too many of us to fit anywhere smaller. Ivy was led out in a daze, and immediately a flock of sisters descended on her, chattering all at once. How old is our little sister this year? Silly, she's the same age as the rest of us, obviously. Where have you been living all these years? Why'd it take you so long to come home? Have you had any schooling, little sister? You look so pale. Are you taking some kind of medicine? What are you good at, little sister? We could all learn from each other. My mother looked over her 9 daughters with unmistakable pride. It had been a chaotic road getting here, but every single one of them had turned out to be a good girl. Diana, the eldest, had come home early and had already mastered music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Vera, the second, had also come home fairly early, though she'd never cared for those refined arts. These days, she served as a battalion commander in the Falcon Battalion and was rarely home. Nora, the third, had grown up poor and terrified of poverty, so the moment she came home, she threw herself into learning how to make money. These days, she was responsible for most of the household's income. Sylvia, Iris, Clara, Rosalind, and Odette had all come home considerably later, but every one of them had thrown herself into mastering some skill regardless. Sylvia excelled at embroidery. In the years my mother's fingers had been off limits to needlework, it was Sylvia's embroidered pieces that had gone to court as gifts for the palace ladies. Iris was a gifted painter. Clara had a talent for medicine. Rosalind could charm anyone in any room. Odette had come home the latest of them all, but she was sharp enough to already be serving as a princess's companion. And me? I'd cornered the market on modern cuisine and had every single one of them wrapped around my little finger through their stomachs. And Ivy? As far as I knew, she couldn't do a single thing. After the farmer's wife had swapped her out at birth, Ivy hadn't exactly suffered, but the family had been too poor to afford lessons of any kind for her. Who are they? Ivy stammered, trembling. These are all your sisters. Come say hello, my mother said warmly, waving her over. Ivy looked like she might faint on the spot. She could never have imagined it, she traveled all this way to find her family, only to discover they already had 8 other daughters waiting for her. No. It's not possible. I'm the only real one. I'm your only daughter. Mother, they've tricked you. The courtyard went dead silent. My mother's smile faded. Her brow creased. Don't talk nonsense. Every one of these girls is your true sister, bound to me by blood just like you are. How could that possibly be faked? Blood? What blood? Ivy shrieked. They're fakes. All of them. Someone's playing tricks. Mother, believe me. I'm your only daughter. She was shaking with fury, her eyes sweeping wildly over her sister's varied expressions. Finally, her gaze landed on me, standing beside my mother. She lit up like she'd found her proof, and pointed a trembling finger straight at me. It's her. It has to be her. Celeste Griffith. Is this your doing? Did you come back too? You knew I was coming back, so you found all these frauds to stand against me, didn't you? Ivy yelled. I was standing at my mother's side, a half-shelled pine nut still in my hand, my face carefully arranged into shock and helplessness. My mother's expression turned to stone. She pulled me behind her. Ivy. Have you lost your mind? What do you mean, coming back, what frauds? If they're frauds despite sharing my blood, then what does that make you? Marigold, take Ivy back to her courtyard. She's not to leave without my say-so. And fetch a physician. I want her head examined properly. I won't go. There's nothing wrong with me. Mother, believe me. Please believe me. Ivy was hauled off by 2 matrons, one on each arm, thrashing and fighting the whole way, her hair coming loose. Celeste. You'll come to a bad end. Just you wait. I won't let this go. I'm the real heiress. I'm the real. There was a lot buried in what Ivy had just screamed. My mother hadn't caught it, but I, a well-read woman in my own right, understood perfectly. Ivy had been reborn. Well, wasn't that something? A story about a real heiress and a fake one had just turned into a story about a reborn real heiress running into a transmigrated fake one. Talk about a plot twist. After a few days locked in her courtyard, Ivy seemed to have learned her lesson. The day she was let out, she went straight to my mother and dropped to her knees, tears already streaming before she'd said a word. Mother. I was wrong. She sniffled, her shoulders shaking. That day, seeing so many sisters all at once, it frightened me so badly. I was just scared. Scared that I'd come home last, that I'd fall short of my sisters in everything, that I'd never earn mother's love. She lifted her tear-stained face, a face that shared a good 6 parts resemblance with my mother's younger self. I never knew I could have such a gentle, beautiful mother, that I could live a life without farm work, without feeding chickens and ducks, day after day. My mother looked at Ivy's thin, drawn face, listened to her recount her hard years, and her heart softened. She sighed and bent down to help Ivy to her feet. There. What's past is past. You're home now, that makes you family. Your sisters are all good girls. Spend time with them and you'll see. As for love. She reached out and stroked Ivy's hair fondly. You're all my daughters. Of course, I love you all. Ivy leaned into her arms, choking back a sob as she answered. Yes, mother. I understand. Then, from an angle only I could see, she shot me a look of pure defiance. A few days later, my father returned to the manor. He surveyed the room full of daughters in their fine dresses and closed his eyes, resigned to his fate. Everyone in Rosemont already knew the Griffith family's daughters were something special. 9 daughters. Every one of them shared the same blood. The sage himself had declared it, 9 daughters of fate, split from one soul and scattered down to earth. A blessing on the Griffith house. What was there left for the Marquis to say? Well then. My father cleared his throat, his voice carrying. Now that everyone's home, it's time we held a presentation ball. Word spread, and the whole manor burst into motion, tailoring gowns for 9 young ladies, commissioning jewelry for 9 young ladies, and making sure every piece matched down to the last detail, with not a single girl shorted. Ivy, meanwhile, had gone strangely quiet these past few days. Aside from greeting our mother each morning, she stayed shut up in her own courtyard. A quiet child was a child up to something. In the original story, this was the very ball where Ivy had schemed to catch me in bed with my brother. Once the household discovered us, my reputation would be ruined, and the Marquis and his wife, in their fury, would have thrown me out of the house. Not satisfied with that alone, Ivy had gone on to have me assaulted in secret. That was the night the original character was supposed to die, thrown out into the rain. From the moment I'd transmigrated in, I'd made a point of keeping my distance from Nathaniel, my nominal brother. I'd been dripping poison in my parents' ears since I was small, too, telling them a real man ought to make his mark protecting the realm, that a house like ours needed real accomplishments to keep its title secure, that grandfather had won his rank on horseback and it was a shame to let his old sword gather dust. Apparently, my father dreamed that very night of his own father chasing him around with a stick. The next day, Nathaniel was shipped off to the border. He didn't come home once in 3 years. Even for this presentation ball, all he sent was a servant bearing 10 pairs of frontier-carved emerald bracelets. I was curious what Ivy could possibly improvise without Nathaniel around to use. Turned out, people can be reborn, but their wits don't come back with them. Ivy had never gone through the kind of proper training a noble daughter received. She hadn't read any scheming household dramas either. Her repertoire of tricks, apparently, began and ended right about here. The moment my dress got splashed by a maid I didn't recognize, I knew. It had started. I set off toward my assigned room with my personal maid at my side. Partway down a quiet stretch of corridor, another maid came hurrying up, begging mine for help. Please, Lady Griffith needs you, something about a missing hairpin for Lady Ivy. My maid glanced at me. I nodded. Go on. I can find my own way to the room. Reassured, my maid hurried off. I walked the rest of the corridor alone, my steps unhurried. When I reached the door, I didn't push straight in, I paused first and listened. Heavy breathing came from inside. I opened the door. Ivy was there. She looked at me with pure venom. Did you really think I was stupid? You knew I'd been reborn, so of course you'd expect the same old tricks and prepare for them ahead of time. Celeste, you're as good as dead. The words had barely left her mouth when noise erupted at the door. Ivy's eyes lit up. From somewhere, she produced a dagger and plunged it into her own chest. Help. Help me. Celeste is trying to kill me. She staggered toward the door and collapsed straight into my mother's arms as it opened. Ivy. What happened to you? My mother nearly jumped out of her skin at the blood-soaking Ivy's dress. Someone get the physician. Where's the physician? Hurry. Ivy shook her head weakly, then, with visible effort, pulled a blood-stained doll from inside her robe. Celeste. Celeste resents that she isn't one of the fated daughters, that she can never marry into the royal family, so she made this cursed puppet of the crown prince. I caught her, and she tried to silence me for it. I looked at Ivy's performance and pointed at myself, unable to help it. Me? Ivy ignored me completely, gazing up at my mother with an expression of pure fragility. My mother's tearful face froze solid. You're saying Celeste cursed the crown prince because she can't marry into the royal family? Ivy, utterly oblivious to the strange look on my mother's face, didn't notice the sisters behind us either, all of them fighting not to burst out laughing. She simply stared, full of feeling, at the man standing at the back of the crowd, the crown prince. Yes. I beg the Crown Prince not to hold this against the Griffith house. Celeste isn't truly of Griffith blood, whatever she's done has nothing to do with this family. Under the weight of Ivy's expectant gaze, the Crown Prince parted the crowd and stepped forward. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was heavy with the muffled, agonizing effort of 20 people trying simultaneously not to burst out laughing. Crown Prince Julian stepped out from behind my father's old collection of ceremonial armor, stepping neatly over the dripping puddle left by Ivy's entrance. He was a tall, sharp-eyed man whose scowl was usually enough to make lower court officials sweat through their robes. Right now, however, his lips were twitching so violently he looked like he had a mild facial twitch. He picked up the blood-stained object Ivy had dropped at his boots. It wasn't a cursed poppet. It was a plush, stitched cotton dough man, a prototype mascot I had drawn up 3 weeks ago for my new chain of steamed bun shops. It was stuffed with cotton, wore a tiny felt chef's hat, and had 2 black sesame seeds sewn on for eyes. Miss Ivy, Julian began, his voice raspy as he fought for control. You claim Lady Celeste crafted this dark magic doll to hex me because she despises her inability to marry into the imperial family? Yes. Your Highness. Ivy sobbed, her hands still pressed against her bleeding chest, her face pale with dramatically rendered tragedy. I saw her with my own eyes. She stabbed it with needles and cursed your divine bloodline. I tried to stop her, and she turned her blade upon me. Julian stared down at the cotton dough man. Then he turned his gaze to me. Lady Celeste, Julian said, his voice dripping with ironic exhaustion. Is this true? Did you craft a dark talisman to force your way into my imperial bedchambers? I sighed, stepping out from behind my mother and smoothing down the pristine silks of my sleeves. Your Highness, I said humbly, if memory serves, you came to my tea courtyard 3 weeks ago, offered a dowry of 3 northern cities, and begged me to become the crown princess, a proposal I politely rejected by throwing a freshly baked savory scallion pancake at your forehead. Ivy's weeping cut off so sharply she nearly choked on her own saliva. What? In fact, Julian continued, pinching the bridge of his nose as if suffering from a sudden migraine, I believe her exact words were, would rather eat raw turnip leaves in a ditch than spend my afternoons managing your 300 concubines and listening to court ministers debate grain tariffs. Furthermore, she charged me 2 silver taels for the pancake. The room couldn't hold it anymore. Nora, my 3rd sister, the one who managed our household's vast network of commercial shops, snorted so hard tea nearly came out of her nose. Rosalind buried her face in Sylvia's embroidered sleeve, her shoulders shaking violently. Even my mother had to pull out a handkerchief and pretend to blow her nose to hide her widening grin. Ivy's head snapped back and forth, her eyes wild with utter disorientation. No, that's impossible. In the past, I mean, in the story, she's supposed to be obsessed with power. She framed me. She wanted the crown prince for herself. Little sister, Clara, my 6th sister, stepped forward gracefully. Clara was our resident medical genius. She knelt beside Ivy, pulled out a small silver probe, and gently poked the gaping wound on Ivy's chest. Next time you attempt to fake a fatal assassination, I suggest using actual blood rather than red cochineal dye mixed with plum syrup from the kitchen. It smells distinctly of cinnamon. Clara dipped a finger into the crimson smear on Ivy's dress, tasted it casually, and smiled. A bit light on the sugar, Celeste. Did you cut back on the syrup recipe? Sugar is expensive this season, I replied blandly. We must economize. Ivy sat on the cold floor, her face turning from pale white to a deep, embarrassed purple. She looked at Julian, then at my mother, then at the 8 sisters surrounding her like a wall of exquisite, impeccably dressed statues. Why? Ivy stammered, her voice thin and trembling. Why are you all acting like this? She's a fake. She's not even a Griffith. I am the blood. I am the only real heiress. My mother looked down at Ivy, her expression shifting from amusement to a cold, weary disappointment. Ivy, Mother said softly, holding up her bandaged hands. When you first arrived, I was ready to open my heart to you. I pitied your hard life. But you have done nothing since entering this house except cast venom at your sisters and stage absurd theater to ruin Celeste. She's not my sister. Ivy screamed, scrambling backward on her palms. She stole my life. In my past life, she. Take her back to her courtyard, Mother commanded quietly, turning her back on her. Assign 4 senior servant women to guard her doors. She is not to take one step outside until she regains her sanity. As 2 sturdy matrons hoisted Ivy up by her armpits, Ivy dragged her feet, her eyes locked on me with hatred so pure it could burn through iron. This isn't over, Celeste, she shrieked as she was hauled down the grand hallway. I know how this world works. You're just a temporary imposter. I'm the reborn heroine. You will die in the rain. You will die in the rain. Her screams faded into the distance. Julian tossed the plush cotton dough man back to me. I caught it smoothly with one hand. A fine show, Julian remarked, dusting his hands off. Now, Lady Celeste. About that scallion pancake recipe. If I triple the dowry offer to 6 northern cities, will you at least consider catering my imperial coronation next month? 10 cities, Your Highness, I said, slinging the plush doll into my pocket. And I retain full tax-exempt status for all my food stalls. Julian groaned, but there was a sharp, admiring glint in his eyes. You are truly a terrifying woman. Ivy thought she was locked in a classic reborn heiress narrative, playing chess against a lone villain. What she failed to grasp was that 11 years ago, I hadn't just flipped the chessboard, I had smashed it to pieces, tossed the table out the window, and built an industrial enterprise on top of the lawn. 2 days after the ball disaster, I was sitting in my private pavilion, enjoying a steaming bowl of sweet taro balls drowned in coconut milk. Beside me sat my 8 fake sisters, arranged in various state of casual relaxation. Diana was lazily flicking through a set of military intelligence reports. Vera was polishing her silver spearhead with a velvet cloth. Nora was counting golden ingots with an abacus that rattled like hail on a tin roof. The real heiress is getting restless, Odette reported, taking a delicate bite of a flaky lotus pastry I had baked. She tried to bribe one of the laundry maids yesterday with a silver ring she stole from Mother's vanity. She asked the maid to deliver a letter to Lord Chen's mansion. I paused, my spoon midway to my mouth. Lord Chen? The imperial uncle? The very same, Odette smirked. In her previous life, Lord Chen was the one who orchestrated the factional purge against our family, wasn't he? She's trying to use her future knowledge to team up with the family enemy to destroy us. How tragically predictable, Diana sighed, setting down her brush. She thinks she's playing grand politics, yet she doesn't even realize that Lord Chen's entire secret intelligence network in the capital was bought out by Nora 3 months ago. Nora didn't even look up from her abacus. His chief spy is currently on my payroll as an assistant accountant in my second-tier textile mill. He gives me weekly updates on Lord Chen's gout flare-ups. I chuckled, leaning back against the embroidered cushions. This was the beauty of my 11-year prep work. When I was 5, I knew I couldn't beat the plot's dark destiny by playing defense. I needed an army. But instead of buying mercenary swords, I bought hungry, brilliant, discarded young girls off the street. I gave them food, shelter, education, and love. I showed them that blood didn't define a family, loyalty, shared goals, and mutual protection did. When they passed the fake blood test through the specialized alum solution I provided, my parents, desperate for bloodline security in a turbulent political era, accepted them with open arms. Over time, my parents didn't care about the absurd number of daughters anymore. The house was prosperous, our reputation was legendary, and every single daughter was an absolute prodigy in her respective field. We weren't just a noble household, we were a self-contained, fully integrated political and economic syndicate disguised as a family of 10 sisters. What should we do with her letter to Lord Chen? Sylvia asked, her delicate fingers guiding a needle through silk. Should I swap it with a forgery? No need, I said, taking a sip of warm tea. Let the letter go through. Let Ivy think her grand scheme is working. The higher she climbs on her little mountain of reborn arrogance, the more magnificent her fall will be. Suddenly, the doors to the courtyard were thrown open with a loud bang. Father, the Marquis of Griffith, marched into the pavilion, his face dark as a thundercloud. Behind him walked my mother, looking thoroughly exhausted. accompanied by a dozen senior family elders carrying dusty leather-bound ledgers. Celeste. Father barked, slamming his palm against the stone table. My sisters immediately sat up straight. The atmosphere in the courtyard sharpened instantly. Vera's hand drifted toward the hilt of her spear. Father? I asked smoothly, setting my bowl down. Is something amiss? Father looked around the table, at Diana, Vera, Nora, Sylvia, Iris, Clara, Rosalind, and Odette. Then he looked at me. Ivy broke out of her room an hour ago, Father grunted, his voice stern. She ran straight to the ancestral hall, fell before the family elders, and swore on her ancestors' graves that all 8 of her sisters are street beggars hired with coin 11 years ago. The pavilion fell dead silent. Nora paused her abacus. Vera stopped polishing her spear. Ivy stepped out from behind the elders, her dress torn, her hair wild, her eyes gleaming with manic triumph. It's over. Ivy shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. I found the old accounting records from 11 years ago. I traced the coin payments to the Street Urchins Guild in the north suburbs. Every single one of these girls was bought for 10 silver coins each. They aren't Griffiths. They are filthy street rats. She turned to the elders, her voice soaring in hysterical victory. Grand elders. Strip them of their titles. Throw them into the streets. Expose Celeste for the fraud she is. The elders looked at Father. The room held its breath. Father looked down at the dusty accounting ledgers Ivy had dragged out. Then he raised his head, looked at Ivy, and let out a long, heavy sigh. Ivy, Father said, his voice laced with profound disappointment. Do you truly think I am blind? Ivy's triumphant grin froze. What? Father picked up the ledger, flipped a page, and pointed to a faint signature at the bottom of the 11-year-old transaction record. Who do you think authorized the funds for Celeste to buy those 8 girls from the Urchin Guild in the first place? Father asked dryly. She was 5 years old. Where do you think a 5-year-old child got 80 silver coins? Ivy stared at the signature. Her jaw dropped so low it looked unhinged. Why you knew? Ivy gasped, her voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. You knew they were fakes all along? Of course I knew. Father shouted, slamming the ledger shut so hard dust flew into the air. Do I look like an idiot who thinks a woman can give birth to 8 daughters of the exact same age within 4 years? My mother stepped forward, her eyes soft as she looked at us. Ivy, Mother said gently, 11 years ago, our house was under constant political attack. The Emperor suspected your father of treason, the Imperial Court was trying to strip our noble titles, and I had just lost my birth child to a cruel swap in the countryside. Our family was falling apart. Mother walked over and placed a warm hand on my shoulder, then reached out to pat Diana and Vera. Then little Celeste came to us, Mother continued, her voice trembling with emotion. She brought us clever ideas, brought warmth back into this cold manor, and brought 8 brilliant, brave girls into our lives. Diana saved our family from legal ruin with her mastery of court law. Vera led our private guards to defend our estates. Nora turned our failing merchant trade into a fortune that feeds thousands. Mother turned back to Ivy, her eyes firm. They may not have come from my womb, but they earned their place in this family with their blood, sweat, and love. Blood makes you a relative, Ivy. Loyalty and character make you family. Ivy stood frozen in place, as if struck by lightning. Her entire worldview, her absolute belief that the truth of her bloodline would instantly destroy Celeste and restore her rightful place, had shattered into a million useless shards. No. No. Ivy babbled, backing away, clutching her head. This isn't how the book goes. The fake heiress is supposed to be hated. The real heiress is supposed to win. I have the blood. I am the legitimate daughter. A legitimate daughter who spends her days trying to frame her sisters and conspire with our enemies, Father said coldly. Grand elders, take her away. Lock her in the southern pagoda. No visitors. No privileges. Father. Father, wait. Ivy screamed as the elders stepped forward, their faces stern and unforgiving. I know the future. I know Lord Shen is going to rebel next month. I know the northern border is going to fall. I can help you. We don't need your future, a booming, deep voice echoed from the manor's main courtyard. The heavy oak gates swung open, and a tall man clad in black iron armor stepped into the courtyard. His face was weathered by the northern winds, his shoulder cape stained with the dust of a long ride, and a massive broadsword swung at his hip. Nathaniel. My nominal brother. The one Ivy had planned to catch me in bed with. Ivy's eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. Nathaniel. Brother. Save me. Celeste sent you away to the border to freeze to death. She stole your inheritance. Nathaniel didn't even glance at Ivy. He marched straight past her, clanking in his heavy plate armor, until he stopped right in front of me. Then, to the absolute shock of Ivy and the elders, the feared border general lowered his massive frame and dropped to one knee before me. Fourth sister. Nathaniel roared in a deep, booming voice. The freeze-dried beef jerky and modern battle rations you supplied to my frontline troops allowed us to wipe out the northern barbarian horde 3 weeks ahead of schedule. His Majesty has granted our house the hereditary title of Duke. Nathaniel pulled a wooden chest from his belt and presented it to me with both hands, his eyes shining with absolute reverence. I brought you the pelt of the Northern Wolf King as a gift, Nathaniel said proudly. And I brought 20 carts of rare mountain snow lotus herbs for your tea recipes. I smiled, stepping forward to pat my giant brother on his armored shoulder. Good boy, Nathaniel. I'll make you spicy hot pot tonight. Nathaniel's eyes lit up like a puppy's. Extra beef meatballs? Extra beef meatballs, I confirmed. Ivy collapsed onto the cobblestones, her face completely drained of color. In her past life, Nathaniel had been an arrogant, lazy playboy who was easily manipulated into ruining the family. But because I had urged our parents to ship him to the frontier at age 8, he had grown into a disciplined, fiercely loyal war hero who viewed me as a living war god strategist. Every trap Ivy had set from her past life wasn't just failing, it was crashing into a mountain of preparations I had spent 11 years building. With Nathaniel's return and the family elevated to the status of a dukedom, the final political storm of the capital was brewing rapidly. Lord Chen, the treasonous imperial uncle Ivy had tried to contact, was backed into a corner. Knowing that Nathaniel's northern army had returned victorious, Lord Chen realized his window for a military coup was closing fast. That night, a torrential rainstorm broke over the capital. Rain lashed against the roofs of the Griffith Manor, drumming a dark, rhythmic cadence against the stone tiles. Wind howled through the corridors, extinguishing lanterns and painting the grand courtyard in flashes of jagged lightning. It was the exact same weather as the night the original character died in the book. I sat in the central main hall, enjoying a bubbling copper hot pot filled with rich, crimson spicy broth. Surrounding me were my 9 sisters, Nathaniel, and my parents. We were dipping thinly sliced lamb into sesame sauce, chatting comfortably while the storm raged outside. Suddenly, the wooden doors of the hall were kicked open. Ivy stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, holding a glowing torch in one hand and a raised signal flare in the other. Her face was contorted with insane ecstasy. It's time, Celeste. Ivy shrieked over the thunder. I opened the secret side gates. Lord Chen's rebel army of 3,000 men has surrounded the manor. You thought you won? You thought you could rewrite fate? Ivy threw her head back and laughed hysterically, her eyes burning with fanatic triumph. In the past life, you died in the rain on this exact night. Ivy screamed, her voice piercing the storm. And tonight, fate reclaims its debt. Lord Chen has promised to make me the princess of the new realm, while all of you, my blind parents, my fake sisters, and you, Celeste, will be slaughtered like cattle. My father set his chopsticks down. My mother took a sip of herbal tea. None of my sisters moved. Nora continued dipping a piece of fried tofu into her sauce. Ivy's laughter slowly trailed off as she looked at our completely unbothered faces. Why aren't you terrified? Ivy stammered, holding the torch higher. Did you not hear me? 3,000 armed rebels are in your courtyard right now. Sister Ivy, Odette said smoothly, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Did you mean the 3,000 rebels led by Commander Zhao of the Imperial Guards? Shadow Division? Ivy froze. What? Vera stood up, pulling a silver signal whistle from her belt. She walked to the open door, stepped into the rain, and blew a sharp, piercing note. Instantly, the surrounding rooftops lit up with hundreds of bright red lanterns. The sounds of clashing steel and desperate screams erupted from the outer courtyard, not the screams of the Griffith family, but the panicked shrieks of Lord Chen's rebel soldiers. Within minutes, the heavy footfalls of fully armored imperial troops filled the courtyard. Crown Prince Julian himself walked through the entrance, clad in golden dragon armor, carrying a bloody sword in his right hand. Behind him, two guards dragged a bound, groveling Lord Chen, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Julian wiped a splash of rain from his cheek and looked into the dining hall. Lady Celeste, Julian called out, his voice crisp and amused. Lord Chen's treasonous rebellion has been completely suppressed. All 3,000 conspirators have been captured without a single loss to your manor. Julian stepped closer, looking at the bubbling hot pot on our table. Is that the spicy mutton broth? Mind if I join? Suppressing a coup works up quite an appetite. Take a seat, Your Highness, I said, gesturing to an open chair beside Nathaniel. Bring another set of chopsticks, Marigold. Ivy stood frozen in the rain, the torch in her hand sputtering out as water poured over it. Her knees buckled, and she fell hard onto the wet stone steps. Her mouth open in a soundless scream of total incomprehension. How? Ivy whispered, her voice broken, her spirit entirely crushed. How did you know Lord Chen was coming tonight? Because you told us, little sister, Nora said, smiling sweetly as she chewed her beef ball. You sent that letter through Lord Chen's spy network 3 days ago. Nora's intelligence team intercepted it, decoded your little secret meeting time, and we passed the information straight to the Crown Prince. You used me? Ivy gasped, tears finally spilling from her hollow eyes, washing away the dirt and fake blood on her cheeks. You brought this upon yourself, Ivy, I said softly, standing up and walking to the threshold of the door. I looked down at her as the rain poured around us. You were given a second chance at life, I said quietly, my voice carrying over the sound of the storm. You were reborn with a noble family, wealth, security, and 9 sisters who could have protected you forever. But you were so blinded by hate, so obsessed with a script that no longer existed, that you threw away your true life just to play the victim in a story that was already over. Ivy stared up at me, her eyes completely vacant. The rain soaked her through to the bone, clinging to her gaunt frame, just as it had done to the original Celeste in the book. The prophecy of a miserable death in the rain had come true, but not for the fake heiress who had built a kingdom of love and loyalty. It had come true for the real heiress who had traded her soul for vengeance. Lord Chen's rebellion was completely crushed in a single night. The Emperor, outraged by the treason, issued a royal decree stripping Lord Chen's clan of all titles and rewarding the Griffith house with unprecedented power. Ivy was stripped of her family name by royal decree and sentenced to life imprisonment in a remote mountain monastery in the frozen Western Territory, a place where no noble titles mattered, where she would spend the rest of her days doing hard labor in total isolation, left alone with her bitter, useless memories of a past life that would never return. On the morning of her departure, I stood by the grand gates of the manor. Ivy was dressed in coarse gray prisoner robes, her hands bound in wooden stocks. She looked older, her face sunken, her bright eyes dimmed into gray ash. As she passed me, she stopped. Celeste, Ivy whispered, her voice dry and hoarse. Who are you really? You aren't the Celeste from my past life. She was weak, jealous, and foolish. I leaned in slightly, whispering so only she could hear. I'm just a reader who didn't like the ending of the book, I said with a light smile. So I wrote a better one. Ivy stared at me for a long moment, then let out a strange, quiet laugh, a laugh of defeat, realization, and final surrender. She turned away and let the soldiers march her down the muddy mountain road, disappearing into the morning fog. 2 years later, the Griffith dukedom had become the undisputed heart of the capital's culture, military, and commerce. Diana had been appointed the Grand Imperial Scholar, the first woman in history to hold the post, advising the emperor on state policy. Vera had taken full command of the western border garrison, leading a force of 50,000 troops, earning the title of the Silver Valkyrie. Nora's commercial empire spanned across 7 neighboring nations, controlling trade routes, maritime shipping, and banking houses. Her wealth was said to rival the imperial treasury. Sylvia's embroidery house supplied garments for foreign royalty, while Iris opened the grandest art academy in the realm. Clara founded the Imperial Medical College, training thousands of doctors in modern hygiene and herbal medicine. Rosalind became the chief diplomat of the court, resolving foreign conflicts. With a smile and a cup of tea, and Odette managed the internal administration of the Empress's household. And as for me, I opened the largest culinary network in the continent, the 10 Sisters Pavilion. It served hot pot, modern pastries, distilled tea spirits, and regional delicacies, attracting scholars, generals, princes, and commoners from thousands of miles away. On a bright spring afternoon, the grand courtyard of the Griffith Manor was filled with laughter and the rich, intoxicating aroma of roasted meats and sweet plum wine. A massive round table, specially crafted to fit 12 people, sat in the center of the garden. My father sat at the head, looking considerably younger and entirely unbothered by political stress. Beside him sat my mother, her skin glowing, her hands completely healed, wearing no bandages whatsoever. Nathaniel was piling food onto his plate like a starved bear, while my 8 sisters chattered, debated, and laughed, tossing crisp silver coins into a pot as part of a friendly drinking game. Crown Prince Julian sat beside me, dressed in simple civilian robes, shamelessly stealing a fried duck wing from my plate. Lady Celeste, Julian said casually, wiping his mouth with a silk napkin. I have officially persuaded the court ministers to pass a law allowing noble women to maintain independent commercial titles after marriage. I raised an eyebrow at him. Is that so? It is, Julian smiled, his eyes locked onto mine with unmistakable warmth. So, now that your food empire is tax-exempt, your family holds the highest noble rank, and your sisters control the nation's military, economy, and legal system. Do you have any more excuses to reject my marriage proposal? The entire table went completely silent. Diana paused her teacup. Vera laid her hand on her sword hilt. Nora stopped counting her coins. All 8 sisters turned simultaneously to glare at the Crown Prince with terrifying, protective eyes. Listen here, Your Highness, Nathaniel growled, slamming his heavy mug down. If you want to marry 4th sister, you have to pass through my 50,000 border troops first. And my merchant blockades, Nora added coolly. And my legal veto, Diana smirked. Julian looked around at the formidable wall of fiercely protective siblings and let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. Right. I suppose I'll have to submit my application in writing to all 9 of you first? My mother let out a soft, joyful laugh, resting her chin on her hand as she watched her children bicker under the warm spring sun. 10 daughters, mother murmured with a happy, tearful sigh, reaching over to pat my hand. My perfect 10. Truly, I am the luckiest mother in the world. I smiled, taking a long sip of chilled sweet plum wine, watching the lively, chaotic, and beautiful scene unfold around me. The rain had long since stopped. The alleyways were far behind me. And in this life, I didn't just survive, I created a warmth that would last forever.